Thank you, everyone, for coming. My name is Lindsay Sturman. I'm one of the co-founders of the Livable Communities Initiative, and we are going to do about I'd say, 15 to 20-minute presentation about single stair, and then we'll open it up for questions. And we're just excited to be talking about this incredible reform. So I'll introduce who's going to talk. So I'll start with Scott Epstein. He's the policy director of Abundant Housing LA. LA's leading advocacy organization for pro-housing. John Claflin from Studio Claflin. He's an urbanist and architect, and he's LCI's in-house architect. Ed Mendoza, my co-founder and the LCI policy director and a policy analyst at Cal UMB. And then Josh Gonzalez, who you just met, Director of Education and Events at Abundant Housing LA. And we will be answering any questions you have in the chat if you have any questions. And then stay after the presentation and we can answer any questions. So we'll start with Scott.
Well, thanks so much, everyone, for being here. We at Abundant Housing LA are really excited to be partnering with Livable Communities Initiative on a design competition to try to get great ideas for beautiful single-stair buildings. And we're also really excited to be collaborating with LCI on advocacy efforts around single stair reform that are happening at multiple levels. So thanks to Ed Mendoza and the LCI team, we have a state process for getting to single stair buildings through a report led by the fire marshal and with collaboration of other state actors. So we're hoping to get to the point where we can have statewide single stair buildings being legal up to 6 stories, but there's a local alternative as well where cities can adopt their own amendments to their own building codes through a wonky thing called the AMMR process. And we're seeing some movement on that, which is incredibly exciting. So just tomorrow, actually, we have Councilmember Rahman and Yaroslavsky's motion to bring single stair reform to the city of LA at the Planning and Land Use Management Committee of the city of LA. And so it's a great motion which asks for a report back, but also is very prescriptive in saying do whatever is necessary to amend your building code to allow single stair buildings up to 6 stories. Tomorrow is the sort of the first step in the process. It'll have to go to full council, and then the agencies will have to start working on it. They'll come back to planning and land use. They'll come back to full council, but it's a very important step. So I will, after I talk, I will put our Eventbrite page in the Slack, as well as my and my colleague Jake Pierce's emails. If you're interested in coming tomorrow to give public comment at Planning and Land Use, we do want to make sure that we start to build the public show of support that's going to be necessary to actually pass this reform. It sounds like folks are pretty familiar with what this is, so I don't want to take up too much time. I'll just, I guess, highlight what I see as some of the key benefits of this policy reform. As probably most of you know, the main way of building multifamily housing, because of this law that requires us to have 2 stairways, is sort of a very large format option for multifamily, because you have to have a corridor, a hallway that connects those 2 stairways. You end up having these large buildings, often created by amassing more than one parcel or many parcels. And you have small units along 2 sides of it, basically like a hotel corridor. That means that the units are generally not particularly good for families, particularly larger families. They don't have light and air on both sides, so they're limited in sort of their livability. They take up a lot of space because these hallways take up a lot of space. That means less space for open space, for shared gardens and the like. So it's a less livable product, and it's also a more expensive product, right? Because you have to amass more land. You have to build more of the total floor area is consumed by non-usable space, so that's less rent that you can collect. And then you're also just preventing a lot of potential housing on smaller parcels where you simply can't fit these larger format buildings. And so this is a huge deal for housing abundance in our housing crisis. It is a tool that will be very, very useful for our commercial corridors, where we have a lot of underutilized land and where we have not been able to unlock a one-story storefront and turn that into 20, 25 housing units. It's also a very useful tool in our residential neighborhoods to kind of unlock more of the missing middle housing that we so desperately need in our region. So we're thrilled about it. I hope you will can stay engaged in this work. I really think folks like Ed and Lindsay have been talking about this for years, and it's because of their hard work that we're here. But I think we're kind of at an inflection point where we're really going to make a lot of progress. But we can only do that with your help. So please stay engaged, and thanks so much.
Thanks, Scott. Hey, John, can I throw it to you and to do, John is going to do a presentation with some of those slides, by the way, were amazing. And he's going to pull in, I think, a few more.
Thank you all for joining us. I'll do the best I can here with this technology. I'm trying to share my screen and you'll see this presentation here. Let's see if this thing works. Okay, excuse me 1 second. Here we go. Okay.
Yeah, perfect.
So basically, so I came on board with this process to basically create great architecture. And I grew up in Boston and New York City, and my wife is French. So I've lived in some very nice places. I've lived in London for a while. So I've lived in places where people are actually really enjoy urban living. And Lindsay and I talked about this a long time ago of like, how do we actually create streets that look something like this, or like this, or like this, or like this? I mean, multiple streets around the world in many different cities that actually have a very high quality of life and present a wonderful urban streetscape. So we started as sort of my trial by fire was like, okay, let's take a building on Washington Boulevard in Culver City and see like, okay, what can we actually do with this building, which is on a commercial corridor? It's a single story commercial building. There are thousands of these in Los Angeles. And what could be done with this building? So I quickly did a sketch of like, okay, let's put a few floors of apartments on top of it and see what we get. And I very quickly learned that you basically can't do this in the city of Los Angeles. That unlike thousands of other cities around the world, you're probably familiar with any kind of townhouse has been converted into apartments. They have a single staircase in the middle, but you can't do that in Los Angeles. You can't do that because of a single staircase. And you can't do it because of side yard setbacks. And so there's the side yard setbacks issues, but there's also the double loaded corridor. So here's a good diagram to show you exactly the problem that we're facing without the single stair ordinance basically coming into effect. You are essentially required by the city of Los Angeles to have 2 staircases at the farthest distance possible on your site with a corridor connecting the two, which basically means you're giving your best real estate, essentially, 2 staircases. Instead of having them be an internal staircase with a skylight, you're putting them on the edges of the building, which means that they're taking space on the view side towards a nice avenue, or on the back side overlooking some houses on the rear, let's say. So it is a terrible, terrible ordinance that ends up basically giving you buildings that kind of look like this, that essentially have these long corridors in the middle or on the sides if they're not as narrower, where you have staircases at either end. And you get something like this. On a narrow lot, you basically have views on only one side, and the views are essentially looking at a building that's 5 feet away, because that green area is not planted, beautiful Central Park, wonderful parks you want to be in. That's basically just a setback. But the yellow in this diagram here, as you can see, is just a hallway. And it's a hallway where basically the back of your apartments, your bathrooms are looking at a hallway. And so we felt like this, sorry to jump ahead, that this wasn't the best way to deal with this. You have this kind of situation where, again, you have hallways with stairs at either end. And we thought, okay, can we put all these things in the middle? Now, again, in countless cities throughout the world, this is allowed. You are allowed to put one central staircase in the center of the building. And what this does is it basically means that the building is looking into itself, that you have party walls that are solid walls without windows on the property line on, let's say, this diagram, the north and the south, but on the east and west, you have views on the street or in the back, overlooking residential properties behind you. And you have this courtyard that's created, the green area, that basically is for the apartment. So this diagram, so I basically was asked by Lindsay to see if I could design some apartment buildings that would work in this kind of model, where you went lot to lot in terms of the actual footprint, but you had a center staircase and had some kind of courtyard in the middle. And you start to find that actually this is a really nice way to live. And it allows for lots of different floor plans. You can see in this floor plan on the bottom that you have a 1-bedroom apartment on the left and 2 studio apartments on the right. But those are actually looking privately into a private courtyard, which can be planted and become, what the residents would want. This sort of was our key idea for the Livable Communities Initiative, was to basically create a series of buildings that could be replicated throughout Los Angeles that would provide light and air, green courtyards, have sort of a diversity of units, because if you put 50 studios in one building, that basically is a dorm. And you want to have some multiplicity of units. You want to have 1-bedroom studios, 2 bedrooms, so that you have different types of renters or owners inside the same building, which makes for a more diverse neighborhood. And so the kinds of things you'll start seeing is that you'll see, like, okay, in a larger lot, you can basically create sort of 2 buildings, essentially back to back. These are basically 2 single staircase buildings that on the ground floor, on the bottom image, are connected by one sort of yellow hallway, takes to one to the other. But from, and the floors up above, in the upper image, upper floor plan, you see it's got courtyards surrounding a central stair. Or something like this, where you have a narrower lot, or a shallower lot, and you have one central staircase. And in this version, you've got single studio apartments. You got 1-bedroom, 2 bedrooms off of that same courtyard. This same kind of thing. I mean, it goes on and on. It can be replicated throughout the city and create environments where you have an internal courtyard. And the city is made up of rectangular lots mostly that replicate themselves over and over and over again. So different parts of the city have different size lots, but we felt we could actually say, okay, if it's the same floor plan, we could put different facades on the face of them. And this is something that was done very effectively in a city called Paris. And Paris from 1850 to 1870 essentially rebuilt itself. What we think of as Paris now today is essentially a series of buildings where, even though the lots were very different, the facades were very similar. They were the same heights, they were the same materials. You would literally go to the building department and they would give you the plan for what you would do for a facade, and what you did behind it was whatever you wanted to do. But the city had a uniformity of type of architecture that created a harmonious whole while having variation in the particulars. And they literally had a sort of a kit-based kind of architectural system where you could basically say, oh, I want more detailing or less detailing, but you ended up having streetscapes like this. You ended up having these wonderful streetscapes which had stores on the ground floor, sometimes a second floor that would sometimes be apartments, but more often than not were sort of offices or storage room for the ground floor commercial spaces. Then a piano nobile, which you can see in this in the picture on the left, the balcony, the sort of first level balconies was sort of the highest floor. And as you went ascended in height, your floors became narrow, ceilings became narrow and narrower, higher, lower and lower. Because back in the day before the elevator, it was a big trek to go up to the top floor, which is why in the attics, basically in the garrets, you had either servants for the wealthier residents living below, or you had artists, because those apartments at the top were hot in the summer, cold in the winter. But you had in one building a multiplicity of socioeconomic groups. You actually had rich and relatively poor people living in the same building, which meant for a diverse neighborhood. That was purely because of the architecture. And so we felt we could bring this, if we're able to pass the single stair ordinance, we're able to bring the same thing to Los Angeles and have streetscapes that are basically built up of the same building behind the facade, but of multiple different facades. And these different facades would allow for courtyards behind them of varying different sizes depending on the size and scale of the building. But you would have this basically in Los Angeles. You'd have your streetscapes, more public space, but you'd have private places behind where you as residents can have some private outdoor space to yourself. And you'll see that in this instance, for example, LA used to do this all the time. This is a building in downtown LA. So we were able to build these things and build courtyards and build buildings that actually have these wonderful sort of communal spaces, which were private spaces. Here's a great photo. This is Venice, not Venice, Italy, Venice, California. And this is basically what we're talking about doing at LCI. On the right, even though there's an arcade in front of it, all of those buildings are basically the same building. They're all the same ceiling heights, they're all the same floor plate, but they have different facades. So it looks like a group of buildings that have been put together, over time, but actually that's one, series of buildings built at the same time. And we can end up with streetscapes that look anything like all of these things that have actually been done over, countless cities, countless years, and countless parts of the world. So that's sort of what we're talking about doing at LCI and creating kind of a kit building kind of system where basically you're allowed to build these kind of things so they would actually be pre-approved, and you would actually, could build this same building with a different facade. You'd have a group of floor plans you could draw from and a group of facades you could choose from and create a city that would look like a multiplicity of different facades and different buildings, but actually are essentially the same building behind itself. And that all comes back to the single stair ordinance. In order to pass that, it means it allows us to build these kind of buildings. That's it.
Thank you, John.
Okay, so
That was
that's
amazing.
okay. How do I end the share? Right.
You just stopped sharing, I think.
Ah.
So yeah, we've had a bunch of questions in the chat. So we keep dropping questions in the chat, or if anybody wants to raise their hand. And we have Ed here, and John, and Scott, and Josh, and I can answer questions about mobility, which I don't think anybody has, but I am happy to.
I actually got an email when promoting this event. Someone rather aggressively asked me and what's the safety in regards to like fire and things like that. They asked it in a different way, but that's basically their concern. A lot of people see two staircases or more as essential because it allows for people to be able to exit the building. But I think that what we're maybe not accounting for is sort of like some of the designs that we saw. And so I wonder if anyone could speak to maybe like actual research on safety or anything like that that we might be able to share with folks to assuage their concern.
Yes, let me take that question. That question is tailor-made for me. So I always like context whenever I talk about this. So the top is the largest two-stair building you can build. It's pretty large. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but here are some dead-end corridors. And by law, you could allow up to, I believe, 6 units to have a dead end corridor before you meet a stair. And then between stairs, you could have, honestly, I don't know how much this is, but like a lot of units. And then same thing on the other side. A single stair building by design is a totally different building, and it's much smaller in its footprint. The best way I describe this to people is you're not comparing a 747 jet with 2 wings versus a 747 jet with 1 wing. Where you're comparing is a 747 jet with a helicopter. They both fly, they both take you places, but the inside of the buildings are very, very different from one another. There are different conditions in buildings that make them essentially function different through a lens of fire safety. For example, single stair buildings have to have a small floor plate and footprint. Why? Because there's only one exit. You don't want to get stuck in it. So the farthest that your apartment door could ever be from the stairs, 20 feet, no matter what. Same thing with occupancy loads. You can't have that many units on a single floor. You're limited to 4, and that's it. Same thing with height. A 2-stair building could go up to whatever, 100 stories. A 1-stair building will never be taller than 6 stories. And most likely the single stair building won't be 6 stories. It'll be 4 stories. It'll be 5 stories. So when it comes to studies and saying whether a single stair building is safe or not, there are studies. There's one very recent study that we worked on, or we reached out to. We didn't work on personally, but that we reached out to, and they provide really good information. So Pew Research published something, like an extremely extensive study looking into the safety of single stair buildings here in America, abroad. They looked into like smoke spread. They looked into stability in earthquakes. They literally went line by line, seeing whether a single stair building was as safe or safer than a 2-stair building. And the results were that they're just as safe. There's no variation. So a lot of that is kind of attributed to how we build buildings nowadays. Everything is fire resistant. Even furniture within buildings are fire resistant. Most apartment buildings have sprinkler systems. They have very sturdy, fire separation. So if a fire spreads in a unit, it'll take hours until it gets out of the unit. So there's a lot of redundancy, and those redundancies kind of play out in both 2-stair and 1-stair buildings. I could keep on going, but I don't want to ramble for too much.
The bottom line is this is not a fire safety issue.
It's not a fire safety issue. They're completely safe. Yeah.
And Ed has been working with this incredible fire safety group called Woden Fire, and everybody who's involved takes it so seriously. But let's jump to the next question. Have people tried to pass single staircase reform before in LA?
I could answer that one. No. And the reason why. It's very, very simple, and it might seem kind of silly, but maybe not silly to a lot of people. For a very long time, and I experienced this firsthand when I was in college, doing my graduate degree about 10 years ago. I remember talking to a professor of mine and discussing this same typology on a project that we had for class when we were redesigning an American Main Street. And I asked them, why can't we have these, single stair buildings that are so common in Europe and Latin America, that are very ubiquitous, that are probably the most ubiquitous type of apartment building in the world? Why don't we have it here in the United States? And he said, well, Ed, because we'll never get rid of parking minimums in the United States. People love cars, and cars have their requirements. If you're building a apartment building with 10 units, each unit is going to require 2 parking spaces. And in order to accommodate 20 cars, you're going to have to have a radius that is at least, 42 feet, and you're going to have a certain sort of depth. And you just can't have it with smaller lots. You have to assemble. And, you know, if you're thinking about doing a single building on a single parcel, you're wasting your time. Obviously, that ideology has changed dramatically. You know, we live in a time when we say it's fine if we have one parking spot per unit. You know, there's a market for that. It's fine if we, you know, look into infill and look into, you know, having more, you know, less disruptive building practices in our urban cores. It's fine, you know, if we can learn from from you know, foreign places like New York or Seattle or Vermont where this is legal. And so it, you know, sometimes when you look at reforms, you know, and you ask yourself, you know, why did it take so long? It's just, you know, sometimes that's just how life is, and it just took us to, you know,
Well,
to
let me jump in for a second. So
Yeah.
like 90% of Manhattan is a single staircase. I mean, literally, Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, all these places that had townhouses that were converted. London. I mean, it goes on and on and on, where places actually had buildings that have only one staircase. And we have a code that basically is hugely prohibitive to building buildings that can actually solve our housing problem in our city. I mean, for example, in Westwood, there are 63,000 people who come in and out of that city every day. Now, those are people commuting from Simi Valley or wherever the hell they're commuting from. I mean, they're commuting, you know, an hour every day to come in and go to UCLA Medical Center or to go to UCLA or to work, you know, in the offices on Wilshire. Those are 63,000 people or cars that basically could be residents of that neighborhood if we're able to actually enact this kind of reform. And we need it. It's like every other city has it. And Ed's right. And that like it sort of came about from parking, which then meant you sort of had to own a car to have your apartment. But, you know, we are confident that there are 63,000 people who'd be happy to live in Westwood Village and not have a car.
or have
So
or not have two cars, but have
not
one.
have two cars. Exactly. I mean, we live in an age where there are motorized scooters, and there are, you can rent a car for a day. And so I think like we're actually starting to see a moment where we have this incredible need for building buildings that we used to build. I mean, that's the thing. We're not talking reinventing the wheel here. We actually used to build these buildings and build them really well. And it was since World War II that we stopped building these kind of buildings, not just in Los Angeles, but really in every urban environment throughout America. And it's now biting everybody in the ass, excuse my French. Like that's a big problem. And all we're saying is let us build the buildings we used to build and that people love to live in these cities. Anyway, sorry, that's my spiel.
No, thank you for that. And I think that actually, I saw Aaron raise their hand a couple of times. And so I just, if there's something that you didn't get an answer to, please let us know. But I did also notice that sort of line of conversation goes nicely into Scott's question in the chat for Lindsay about parking. He said he does wonder about nice areas and the outside visitor traffic it could attract. Has anyone got good information on how much parking is recommended to be in the area, even if residents themselves might not need much or all of it?
Thank you, Scott. Yeah, and I love all things mobility. We've done a ton of research around parking, and what it turns out is that we've wildly overparked LA, all cities. I think Kansas City is 50% surface parking lots at this point because you could just never quite build enough. So we have so much, there's really good ways. We have tech now to really manage parking. Just to give you an example of Westwood, there's a study done that at the peak time of year when the most people are shopping in Westwood, still 40% of the spots are empty. So we have commercial buildings with empty spots. We have side streets with empty spots. The problem is you don't know where it is. So really the concept is that we've overparked the city and using apps software that it's really a little hinky the way we're using it in America, but it's really getting there where you're driving your car and your map tells you where the closest parking spots are, how much they are, and you go right to it. Everything's automated through an app. So when we get up to speed with what other countries are doing, the feeling is that the research is saying that there won't be a parking issue the way we have it right now, where you can't find it.
Correct.
I guess a less tech answer to this, and to also complement your answer, Lindsay, if you build more walkable communities, places where you feel comfortable, either biking or walking, if let's say you drive down to your local, I don't know, fresh produce market, 5 times a month, right? And five of those times you drive. One thing that we always ask ourselves at the LCA is, what will it take for you to not go to the market, or walk to the market 5 times? What will it take you to walk to that market 1 time? That's it, just 1 time. And if we foster, walkable communities, good infrastructure, improve ADA access, have really beautiful streets with good storefronts that are open to people, we think that will be a catalyst for that. I guess that's that shift in transportation. I think there was a study not too long ago that looked into travel patterns in Los Angeles, and it found that I believe it was roughly half or a little bit under half of people drive, less than, I believe, 2 miles I think it was like half of their commute, or half of their just mobility or movement around the city. Like if we were to target that, I feel like we would make massive inroads in traffic mitigation. And
It's
also,
easily, I'm going to jump in here as a parent with an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old. 4 years ago, we had a second car that came up for lease, and we said, let's experiment. Let's just get rid of the car and see what happens. And we did. And we found that in the year following getting rid of our lease, we used an Uber when we really needed a second car. The total amount we spent was $400. So that's a lot less than having a second car, insuring it, fueling it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we live actually sort of up in the hills. So it's like we actually are not easily walkable, and we actually were totally fine. So the reality is, Ed's right. It's like you don't need, people think they need a car. It's really more of a sense of like freedom and I can always go everywhere. Well, I grew up in New York and Boston and cities where you wouldn't even want a car. Like a car is a hassle. Like you actually can walk anywhere you want and get in a subway and off you go. So it's like there is actually this, I see we're sort of shift happening in Los Angeles where people are saying, you know what? I don't necessarily need this thing to get me around. I mean, 20-somethings aren't yearning to buy a car and live that kind of lifestyle. They want to be more in an urban environment where they can walk to things. Like that's actually happening. So we're just responding to what is an innate need in people in living in a city.
Yeah, the data is showing that the demand for walkable neighborhoods outstrips supply by 4 to 1. So and some people think it's 7 to 1, and that 50% of people don't want a backyard. They don't garden, right? They have no interest in a backyard. They want to live in an apartment. So I think, we're so single family home heavy in LA that I think people forget that.
Can I jump in for Scott? Because it's a nice point
Yeah.
about this and how architecture matters. I'm sorry, I'll mispronounce your last name, Scott Derber. Nice question. And when you think about a building that's lot to lot, right? It means the party walls are up against another building. It means, just think about the math of it. You're spending money on your front facade and your rear facade. You're not actually having to spend money on 4 sides of a building. If you're on a corner, you benefit from having a corner and views on 2 sides, right? So, that's a different sort of paradigm. But if you're in the middle of a block, to have your facade on the front and your rear section, you see this all the time in every major city where the facade on the street side is, let's say, beautiful cut stone and the back is brick. In our case, it could be some cast stone elements in the front and stucco on the back. So you basically are contributing as a piece of architecture to the streetscape and making the city more beautiful, which then makes it more livable and a place where people want to actually spend time in. In all of our discussions, and the reason why I'm in this whole thing, Lindsay got me involved, is that I feel architecture is really, really important. And for us, we're designing buildings that actually are things that like I personally would want to live in. I mean, they have higher ceilings. Higher ceilings means they're cooler rooms. Literally, the heat is rising to the top. I mean, there are various things that like that we don't really think about because we're building buildings with a 20-year lifespan where they're just basically a piece of garbage. You know, if we build nice buildings, they actually can be repurposed over, 100 years versus, a very short shelf life. And we feel that if you spend that money and it isn't twice the budget, it isn't actually a huge amount of money. It costs the same amount of money for that carpenter to hang a shitty door versus a nice door. We're actually saying like, okay, these things can really make a difference and they aren't hugely expensive in the greater scheme of things. And they hugely contribute to the success and quality of life in a neighborhood. So anyway, that's our.
I want to just add to that because I think John's really helped us understand that the passive design is that when you do high ceilings or colonnades that he was talking about, or loggias, you can design. 25% of LA doesn't have AC, and I know it's getting hotter, so that's a different, obviously a huge issue. But there's houses in the valley where people don't have AC, and Francis Anderton did a beautiful essay about two houses, no AC. They redid one. Now it's just, just needs massive AC. So we really can build the way that because we're a Mediterranean climate, 3% of the globe is our climate. We are the luckiest climate, there is because you barely need heat and you don't need AC if you do it right. And the beautiful thing about a standard plan is that you can put time and effort into a really well-designed plan and then replicate it. So for an architect, they get to do it 10 times. Angus.
And she's right. And for example, the city of Los Angeles used to allow you to build a porch, but now that's considered interior square footage. So there's no builder who's ever going to build a porch or what's called a loggia, which is like a porch on the second or third floor of a building, basically an outdoor room. Now that's the perfect space to be in the city of Los Angeles. Okay, literally everyone wants to be outside. No one wants to be under the sun, which is why when you go to a restaurant, you want to be under an umbrella or be under a tree. Like it's great to have a sunny, nice day. You just don't want to be baking under it, right? So basically we have prevented porches from being built to buildings. And what porches do is they actually cool the air before it enters the building. So imagine if every building had some kind of overhang or a porch before the air entered the building, you literally would be cutting your electricity costs or electricity usage, by a third instantly by just the architecture you're building. And so this is the kind of things that we're looking at saying like, okay, can we actually provide environments where central courtyards help to cool the air around a building, create cross ventilation to allow air to move through an apartment, to allow fresh air to come in and stale air to move out. Like these are kind of things that like are actually simple fixes that, by the way, have been done for thousands of years. And let's see if we can do them here in Los Angeles. But guess what? We're not allowed to because the codes prevent us from doing these things. So that's sort of what we're talking about. Let's get the codes to work on our behalf and help us to create great architecture in the city.
I think Aaron has a question. Ed, did you see this? Ed and John.
What was the question?
Okay, so I will just read it. Thanks for this great presentation. I think California is so eager for this, and for the fire parking is not an issue. I wonder if the financing is many of the historic images shown, excepting Paris, were 3-story, which is legal now for single stair. Is that not being built on small lots now because it's not being financed, not penciling for investors? The very large double staircase buildings seem to have the scale to pencil for investors. Will going from 3 stories to 6 stories make these appealing to investors and developers?
Short answer, yes. The other short answer is we are building 3-story single stair buildings. Not in LA. We have a few examples in LA, but we're getting quite a bit of these type of buildings being built in San Diego. A lot of it has to do with the ability for San Diego to allow for, I guess, better building design standards, to have buildings, you know, fit better in lots, something we could talk about later. But they are being built. But those very same developers and slash architects are the same people that, you know, have called us and said, please, you know, if you were to make this, you know, if you were to allow a single stair building to go 4 or 5 stories tall, we would exponentially increase the amount of sites that we're able to build. Because you're limited to the amount of units, you know, you're kind of capped, and you kind of work within that cap. If you increase this, if you increase, you know, the single stair limit by even a floor, that's a 30% increase, and 30% increase makes it whether you build a building or you don't build a building. Another thing that this, I guess, this type of building typology benefits from is the size of units. So today, a lot of apartment buildings are kind of incentivized to build singles and one beds. That's because that's how the, you know, the price, you know, the math pencils out, and that's how essentially also the building code allows you to, you know, kind of, you know, put as many units as you can on a floor. Because single stair buildings limit you in the amount of units that you could put per floor, a developer will think, you know, will say, okay, you know, if I'm allowed to build 4,000 square foot per floor, I'm going to build 4,000 square foot per floor and make these units a little bit larger. And so what you'll get is you'll get a lot of 2-bed, 1 baths, 2-bed, 1.5 baths, 3-bed, 2-bath units, where you won't get those units in just the building typologies that we build today. And so when you all of a sudden have, you know, a different type of building, I guess, unit makeup, then all of a sudden you have developers saying like, well, you know, if my unit has cross ventilation, if, you know, all the bedrooms have access to windows, of which a lot of, you know, buildings being built today don't have access to windows. You know, if you have a unit that has an internal courtyard, you know, these buildings or these units lend themselves to be for home ownership, you know, because they're essentially, you know, single family homes floating in the sky. And so that kind of also changes the dynamic of, you know, of people, you know, saying, you know, I want to raise a family. Do I leave to the suburbs or move city, or do I stay in LA and have something cheaper that isn't, you know, that I'm not tied to buying a single family home? And so we believe the opportunity for this paradigm change in how we build is massive.
Right. Again, I'm gonna jump in. I mean, like, again, it's about building buildings we used to build. So, for example, I mean, I lived for 10 years in a 600 square foot 1-bedroom apartment, which was fantastic. It was a bungalow unit, around 6 units around a courtyard. And it was pre-war building, a terrific building, really well built, really well designed, totally comfortable. And so all the things we talk about designing are buildings that I do sort of a lot of high-end residential apartment, houses, but things that like I would actually want to live in. And so many apartments that are built nowadays are things you would never want to live in. And talk about the guests, specifically, yes, the higher you go, you get, you know, they pencil out better. Like the 4th or 5th floors end up being basically pure profit. But people seem to be afraid of like a 4 or 5 story building. And the reality is people feel comfortable when the buildings are as high as the street is wide, because that creates basically an outdoor room. So for instance, in New York City, on the side streets, every sort of major side street is about 60 feet wide. So the buildings are about 60 feet tall. And it makes you feel sort of, you know, embraced by the building, by the city. When we have in LA, streets that are 100 feet wide and the buildings on either side are 14 feet tall, that's ludicrous. And you feel like I'm kind of exposed. And so all we're talking about here is basically saying on these major commercial corridors where cars are going by at 45, 50 miles an hour, let's put some buildings that are basically 45, 55 feet tall. And that's not a big deal. That shouldn't alarm anybody. But that seems to be this terror of like, oh my God, we're going to build these huge big buildings. Well, they're going to come anyway, but they're going to come as terrible buildings. They're going to be 7 stories, 8 stories, 9 stories tall, set back 150 feet tall, and they're not going to be at all responsive to the neighborhood in terms of its architecture and sort of, you know, the feeling of creating a great community. So that's all we're trying to do here.
We have a couple more questions and yeah, and we were going to go about 45 minutes. So if people need to drop off, you know, we're happy to stay and keep asking
Erin,
answering
great
questions.
question. I'm gonna have to talk to Erin. So she said, I love the, or Erin,
No,
sorry,
we just did that one. Yeah, we just did that.
Livable Paris buildings, integrated many income levels.
Oh, wait, is there a new one? Oh, yeah, here we go. Sorry. Go.
So Aaron's, I love the example of the Paris buildings integrating many income levels naturally by the attic, Garrett being more affordable due to the no elevator in the past. Is there a way to integrate affordable housing in these buildings? Well, yes, that's exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about having buildings that have very different apartment types in them so that you can have a family come in there. You can have a kid out of college live in the studio. You have a retired couple who wants, maybe they want 2 bedrooms so they can have their little kids stay there occasionally. So we are talking very specifically about those kind of topographies and not necessarily saying it's a pure luxury building, but something that is by its very
Adaptable.
nature, yeah, comfortable to live in, but also something that in terms of its affordability, where the money is being spent on the act, like there's all these one of the complexities of like the open space requirements, but so many codes, the LA codes require you to have this open outdoor space that you're never going to use. I was like, well, let's put it into the apartments. Wouldn't you rather have 50 or 100 more square feet? So let's make apartments that families can actually live in. And the more you build of these things, the more affordable they become. And it's basically like, let's just build more of them. And then that will literally solve that problem.
Yeah, and we've comped the it really, some of John's designs have a 800 square foot 2 bedroom, and compared it can be half to a third to a quarter of the price of a single family home half a block away in somewhere place like Culver City. So it really is creating a ton of affordability, and it also lends itself to um, creating a model that really brings down the cost and is very replicatable, also opens up options for our affordable housing developers, permanent supportive housing, et cetera. We have another, if any architects in the group have any questions about the design competition, now is a great time to ask. And we have one more question here. Scott Derber, is there any pushback from architects? Would they prefer doing single family, or are they excited to do multifamily? And will they be compensated for their designs? John, do you want to take that?
Okay. Well, look, we live in Los Angeles. There's always going to be the single family home. And our codes massively tilt the scale towards those houses. You can build single family homes out the wazoo. You can't build anything else, basically. It's incredibly difficult. And so we're trying to basically tilt the balance a little bit and say, hold on a second. Let's find places where people could actually live without a car, but in a really nice apartment. We don't have that in Los Angeles. I don't think any architect is going to be against wanting to design a good building. I think in this particular case, the idea is sort of like what's happened with ADUs, is to allow architects to say, okay, if I've designed a building once, I've been paid to do that, I can take a nominal fee, a lot less, to basically have my building duplicated multiple times. I've already done the work, but it's a similar size lot and it's a similar, facade, let's say, and like off you go. And so you can actually have a library of a whole ton of buildings that would be basically specific for the neighborhood, because what you would build in Los Feliz is going to be different than what you would build in Venice. I mean, things should actually be responding. Buildings should be responding to the environment which they're in. And so the idea would be that an architect could say, you know what, I've done the work already, but hey, I can be paid again for work I've sort of already done. And how great, instead of you having to, as the builder, having to spend, another $150,000, $200,000 for a set of plans, you can spend 50,000 or 25 or 30,000, whatever it is, and have a full set of plans for a building you can build tomorrow. That's been basically pre-approved because it's already gone through the whole approval process, and you can build that same building. Off you go. So I think that's a win-win. It gets architects building more buildings, basically, and more housing for our city.
Aaron has a good question about the feasibility of condos. I mean, I would say that single stair buildings are a fantastic model for ownership, right? These are the kind of urban homes that people would love to have if we just provided them. Now, are there other issues in terms of providing home ownership in the state of California? Absolutely. Like, this is not the only thing we need to do. And you're right in identifying condo liability as a big issue. Housing YIMBY organizations like California YIMBY are trying to tackle this. There was a bill last year that was not successful. There's more bills on home ownership this year. So there's a number of obstacles. But part of what you need is to be able to create the building types that actually work for ownership, right? Who wants to buy like a typology that gets you light on only one side? That's not a very good investment, right? And so this is a really big piece of creating home ownership for folks that cannot and will not be able to own a single family home in California, in coastal California.
Right. It's very simple. I mean, there are a series of really wonderful apartment buildings like Carthay Circle. If you drive down Crescent Heights, you'll find beautiful buildings that are duplexes, right? There's like a 2,000 square foot house on top of a 2,000 square foot house. Well, you're basically not allowed to build those today. And they're beautiful. I mean, a full family, like 3 or 4 bedrooms, like, I mean, full families, 2 whole families can live in the same lot. And so, the more we're able to build these kind of buildings with decent architecture, everyone wins. The NIMBY is like, well, that shitty building next to me, I don't want that. Well, of course you don't. But a nice building next to you that has 2 or 3 or 4 families in it, that's totally great. Like, everyone wins. And I think there's been a real loss of the sense of what really is good architecture, because so many of our codes basically force architects to do crappy things. And it's another discussion for another evening, but basically it's like they just create garbage, and we see it every day, and it's hugely dispiriting to be in a city where you're building bad buildings. And so I'm not answering your question specifically, but it's like, I think that actually we have an opportunity here to really focus on and build really nice buildings for our cities. And then people will spend time in those buildings, spend time in those streets, and off we go.
There's a great article, I think it was in the New York Times, and it's called Parkitecture. And, park architecture that is just about parking, and kind of what architects are forced to do. And I think one other thing on the condo liability is you can get insurance. It is possible to do a workaround, but it absolutely, everybody should be calling your city, your state assembly member and senator, and they don't get a lot of calls for things that people want like this. So call and say, this is really important, because condo liability is hugely important. So thank you, Aaron, for bringing that up. Yeah, Aaron, that's a good point. We've heard that from architects, by the way. They don't want to design condos because their insurance goes up. Yeah. So I think that's everything, unless anyone has any other questions. We'll stay for a few minutes and to see if anybody has anything else. And thank you so much. It's been great to hear all these questions. And thank you to all the presenters. Yeah, and we'll stay if you guys have anything else.
Any questions? A good question. Oh, Jefferson. Oh, you're on mute.
I was waving goodbye.
Oh.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah.
Thank you.
And also, I'm sending follow-up emails with links and all kinds of stuff to everybody who RSVP'd. So look out for that.
Yeah. We're still staying on for 5 more minutes. Any questions? Anything?
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, I guess not.
Oh, people want the slides, so we should share the slides.
Oh, we have a question from Wes. Some of the nicest multifamily I saw this the last year. Are you doing it again?
Are you talking about Francis Anderton's multifamily housing tour? Are you talking about the urban hike that I did?
Yeah. That I think it might be the one we did last year in the summer. We will probably do more walking tours this year, but I think they might be a little bit different. The kind of housing we look at might be a little bit different. So check if you're not already signed up for our newsletter, make sure you stay in tune with that. Or if you have questions or ideas or whatever, you can send me an email too. And I just put that in the chat.
Well, we hope
Thank you, Mimi. Oh, sorry.
join us for our advocacy tomorrow. I think we are, if you have never done public comment before, this is, I think, a good one to get your feet wet. I think we're pretty well positioned for this first step tomorrow, but it's important to kind of show the groundswell of support for this reform. So if you've been thinking, I want to get involved in advocacy, but some of this stuff is kind of scary, this could be a good one for you. You know, I think it's probably going to pass tomorrow, but you'll get a sense of what happens. You'll be able to practice in a fairly low stress kind of environment tomorrow. So give it a shot.
Public comment is you could do it remote. You could call it. Not for this one.
Not for Plum, unfortunately.
Oh, never mind. Not for Plum.
But you can email in, right?
Yes, that's also one of the links. Sending the support letter is probably a good alternative if you're not able to go. Or you can post public comment on there's an official website, but what's the link? I'll get that together and put that in the email too.
Amazing. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Oh, look,
These
hey,
are great
Tony.
questions. Sorry.
Look, Tony Gittleson is in the call.
Yeah. Hi, Tony.
This is great. Okay, well, thanks, everyone.
All right.
Thanks for
Thank
being
you.
Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye.